A little bit vocally challenged today, so I hope everyone can hear me. Okay? So we just had a glimpse just now about how working memory was implicated in listening through that nice talk by Travis. And what I'm going to do right now is, I should introduce myself first. So, I'm Yasmin Risley, and I work in the Developmental Psycholinguistics Lab with Dr. Montgomery, and we study children with language impairment, all right? However, the study that I'm doing today does not focus on children yet, just because, all right? Now, what I wanted to share with you today is what is it that makes it so interesting about understanding how people comprehend sentences. I mean, it's an exciting endeavor, right? All right, so if you do have time after this, in your leisure to do some light reading and go into literature and look up some sentence comprehension and working memory topics for adults, you would find that a lot of the main motives of the researchers, they're interested in studying about the underlying mechanisms that help support people's abilities to understand sentences or process language in the moment, right? So some of the things that they're interested in is that they look at the processes that happens when they're encoding information. And encoding simply means that this is the interface between the stimulus coming in and higher cognition, and how they kind of maintain that information in memory and store it, and how they rehearse it, as well as how they retrieve it from memory, okay? Now, some of the tasks that's done in these studies use offline measures. Offline measures mean that the researchers would make inferences or conclusions from their studies based on their participants' behavioral performance. So you would see dependent variables being accuracy in responses, response times, or error patterns that people make. While some other studies look more into online measures, real-time language processing measures to kind of look at, to index more physiological kind of responses. For example, electrophysiological responses or pupil dilation or eye movement, which you're going to kind of hear after this, okay? So what I'm studying for my first year project was looking into my own language, and my language is Malay. And Malay is a language that people who are in the Southeast Asia, I'll show you a map later, that's their primary language, right? And I think we haven't had any studies in our language that talks about how people comprehend sentences as yet. Now, in English, working memory and its intersection with sentence comprehension has been studied so extensively, I think more than 50 years. Okay, so one of the key memory mechanisms that is focused on in these studies is working memory storage. And you can kind of remember back what Travis talked about, how people store the information while they're processing in the moment. So that's what I'm kind of interested in studying, how well people can store information. Now, another construct of interest is on complex sentences, all right? And in particular for my studies, object-relative sentences. And object-relative sentences is unique in a way because it is a complex sentence because it imposes great processing demands, all right? The word order kind of violates the typical canonical order that English speakers are very attuned to, okay? Now, one of my personal favorites that I still haven't cracked, even as my linguistic friends, background friends told me yesterday, is one that I took from Andrews et al.'s paper. The clown that the teacher, that the actor liked, watched, laughed. Like at first pass, it almost seems kind of impossible for you to kind of determine who did what to who. And the main point about listening to sentences is actually to kind of relate or find relationships between noun phrases and which verb they go to. So don't worry about this. This is not the kind of sentences I'm giving to my participants, okay? We're going to start at the most basic object-relative construct that there is. Right, so I'll kind of give you an example about how my language is in its contrast to English. Now, one index of complexity is word order, okay? And different languages uses different cues or linguistic cues to help aid comprehension, and one of it is word order, right? Subject-verb order is the canonical word order in English, and what's interesting about Malay as a cross-language pursuit, for me at least, is that it shares the similarity with English. And I thought that was a good point to start to study Malay in the absence of other parameters to kind of decipher what makes Malay hard or easy. So when you look at the noun phrases, noun phrase 1, noun phrase 2, and verb phrases, in Malay you would say it as itik besar yang kambing kecil itu kejar sedang duduk. Or in English it would sound like the big duck that the little goat chased was sitting, right? Now, what comprehenders do to kind of strive to reconstruct this OR sentence into an SVO sentence is that they want to mentally convert it. So when they hear it, when they hear the big duck, they kind of have to retain NP1, noun phrase 1, in memory long enough until they reach the embedded critical verb chase, at which point they will automatically reactivate this noun, right? And by doing so, they kind of reactivate it here and they convert this OR structure into an SVO structure. The little goat chased the big duck. And it's easier for them to determine who did what to whom. So that's a strategy that English comprehenders use, and we wanted to see whether Malay, well, that was our prediction, to use Malay to have the same word order as an index of this complexity, right? And the point that I'm mentioning to you all this is because the hypothesis that we're basing our study is on the fact of the notion that MP1, it is the reactivation of MP1 as the critical verb that implicates storage in sentence processing. All right? So far so good? Okay. Then justice to it, moment. Okay. So the research question was to determine whether comprehenders, Malay comprehenders, required similar memory storage demands to support comprehension of complex sentences. Now how we did this is we kind of had two groups of participants, English participants and Malay participants. And the English participants was kind of like a control group, but it wasn't to kind of directly contrast performance between the groups. It was a control group because we wanted to map the performance of Malay comprehenders to see whether the patterns were similar to that of the English speakers. And it was very important for us to do that, seeing that the evidence for the English participants are so clear that working memory storage is invoked. Well, at least it was then. Okay, I know that now there is a lot of shift in terms of the current themes. So how we did this was we constructed two tasks. It's very simple, and as Dr. Montgomery always says, clean study, right? So we had a working memory listening span task, and working memory listening span tasks, or just complex span tasks, are very famously used to index working memory capacity, right? And what it does is, what we have is, participants would do three things. First of all, they'll have to listen to a sentence, and they'll have to judge the true value of the sentence, and they will say yes for true, no for false. And at the offset of the sentence, they're presented with a digit, and they have to remember these digits. And after a series of sentences, which differs in length, they would have to recall all the digits that were presented to them in the order that they heard them, all right? And the dependent variable that we took was the to be recalled item in this index storage, right? For the sentence comprehension task, we had two versions as well, a Malay and an English version, which I'll show you after this. And it comprised of SVOs, filler sentences, as well as object-relative sentences. And the sentences I showed you just now was the sentences that we used. So they're very basic, they're very short, okay, comparative to what I think Muhammad and Anand's going to show later, that their sentences are going to get super long. So let me just show you a clip, if I know how to minimize this. Okay. All right. So you guys can kind of do it. I apologize for the resolution, but I was trying to video record this and kind of manipulate it, and I haven't seen this over a year. So bear with me with the resolution, but try to kind of do the recalling, the digit, okay? Try to remember the digits for this one. All right, here we go.
The cat climbed a tree in the field by the barn. 4. The cub found the boy in the bushes by the tree. 5. The food that the man bought from the store was fresh. 6. The mother that the lunch made for the children was healthy. 9.
So up on the green screen, recall as fast as you can.
6, 9.
I have no idea what it was because I was concentrating. So you guys are good, all right? I tried, several times I tried to I couldn't. All right, so that's an example of our working memory task, and it can get as short as 3 to, I think, 7 sentences, and you'll be surprised at how the participants kind of varied in their performance. I wanted to show you a Malay version to kind of hear how our language sounds like, so I'll just play it for you anyway, okay? Okay, so this is the same set but in Malay version. Maybe Fatima is the only one who could do it, and maybe Dr. Halwal, you can do it as well with your Malay exposure. Okay?
Kucing itu telah memanjat buku di padang sebelah bangsa itu. Tempat cawan itu telah terjumpa budak lelaki itu di dalam semak sebelah pokok itu. 5. Makanan yang lelaki itu beli daripada kedai itu baru dimasak. 6. Ibu yang makanan tengah hari itu masak untuk anaknya adalah berhasiat. 9.
Alright.
It's the same number.
Which is?
4, 5, 6, 9.
I thought you were going to showcase your Malay, Fatima.
Oh,
Perfect. All right. So that was an example of the working memory task, and what we're doing with these two tasks is because we're going to correlate the results, okay? And I'll show you the sentence comprehension task, just for you to have a feel of how we do it. So sometimes when you hear these experiments, you think that, oh, it's so complicated, but when you see it, you're like, that's it. You know, so I wish people would record more experiments like this.
The little bear has kissed the big horse.
So they just touch the agent
The
as
big
fast
fox
as they can.
has carried the little cow. The little bear the big cat kissed is sleeping. The little mouse has chased the big duck.
All right. So participants are asked to touch the animal, the picture of the animal that is doing the action as fast as they can. That's all they're asked to do. Now, the last one, of course, I wanted to show the Malay one. Okay. So exact similar versions.
Beruang kecil itu telah mencium kuda besar itu.
So when my voice was better.
Musang besar itu telah mendukung lembu kecil itu. Beruang kecil yang kucing besar itu cium sedang tidur. Tikus kecil itu telah mengejar itik besar itu.
Okay. Okay, so what we found, I know in the first year project presentations, we kind of presented different results. We reanalyzed these results, and we kind of found that one of the findings was that, as predicted, working memory storage was invoked in OR comprehension for Malay participants. So it goes with the notion that storage is crucial in allowing people to comprehend OR sentences, right? Now, the applications from this, and I was thinking about me coming from a developmental or child language lab, and obviously my direction would be kind of to use these skills or this knowledge about the language to design things for children, right? And I was just wanting to show you, it was really interesting. I was teaching, my daughter's class the other day about Malaysia, and we brought a globe, and when you look at Ohio and Kuala Lumpur, which is where I'm from, is exactly the opposite side of the world. So it's interesting when you kind of think about designing tasks, when you have the availability and the luxury of normative data. For example, you have the luxury of having all these databases on frequency, age of acquisition, and all those really cool data that help you plan and kind of choose which stimulus to kind of put in your experiments. Now, by not having this, it makes you have to put on your creative thinking cap and kind of use whatever skill set you kind of learn here about how to build these homespun tasks and bring them home in the service of our own community. So that's all I wanted to share with you, and I think this project was a very interesting way for me to begin to understand my own language.
Thank you, Yasmin. So hi everyone, hello again. My name is An, and I work with Dr. Halliwell in the Neurolinguistics Lab. And so one of the things that we focus on in our lab is identifying valid and reliable methods to assess language comprehension in people with aphasia. And one thing we want to look at is cognitive effort. And you've heard Travis explain what cognitive effort is basically how much brain power you use when for us, you're processing language. And so then for my first year project, I compare two different measures to see if they both can index cognitive effort in auditory language processing in people without aphasia. So the two methods or measure I look at is fixation duration, which is an eye tracking measure, and task evoked response of the pupils, or TERPs, which is a pupillometric measure. So on your left, this is an example of what the eye tracker can do. The lines show like when your eye moves, and when you fixate on a screen, and the circle shows the duration of the fixation. Like the longer you fixate on an image or a spot, the bigger the circle is. And then over here on your right is what is pupillometry. So basically we measure the diameter of your pupil. And for cognitive effort, we measure the change in the diameter of your pupil as an index of cognitive effort when you are listening to a task or when you are engaged in a cognitive task, like you do math. And the reason why I did this study is because we have pretty good, consistent evidence showing that pupillometry can index cognitive effort in cognitive and linguistic tasks. So when you, for example, when you do a simple math problem, 1 + 1, you don't have to put in a lot of effort in that. But if you do 239 minus 182 right now, that would be, you have to put more effort in doing that. And pupillometry can index that, can capture that change in your pupil. When you are engaged in a more difficult task, your pupil dilate more. And when you, so that's how we see that. But for eye tracking, the evidence is inconsistent. In some reading and in some driving or scene viewing studies, they see that, but it's not consistent. And so we want to compare these two measures. And so Yasmin and Travis's study they use offline measures. They use accuracy and response time, or they count the number of errors that the participant have. So that we consider behavioral offline measure. But my study is an online measure. we measure what's happening during the time that you are doing the task. So that's a difference in the methodology. Okay, so my stimuli were words and sentences. And in order to compare these two, measure eye tracking and pupillometry, we have to find stimuli that have like robust differences. We know that one is easier than the other one. So for words, we determine the difficulty based on the frequency of usage and the age of acquisition. So words that you use more often or that you acquire earlier, then it will be considered easier than words that you don't see as much often, or so you get a word, speech language pathology, that's all. Like when you're older, then that would be harder. So, for example, consider these two words, ball and wrench. Which one do you think would be considered easier? Ball. Yeah. So we know that, and this is one of the two words in my stimuli list. And we want to see, can eye tracking, can fixation duration, or can TERP capture this difficulty? And then sentences, for sentences I use subject-relative sentences and object-relative sentences. And Yasmin explained why object-relative sentences are considered harder, because it's non-canonical, and you have to work harder in your working memory. So consider these. The girl that is driving the boy is talking. And the girl that the boy is driving is talking. Can you see, like, one is subject relative, one is object relative? Okay, so let's pretend that you are in my experiment. And I want you to focus your attention to the screen. I'm going to read your instruction, and you're going to just do like how you will be in the experiment. So I'll give you an instruction. So in this session, you will see some pictures and hear some sentences. Listen to the sentences and look at the pictures in any way that is natural to you. It's okay if you blink. It's important not to talk during the session. The girl that is pushing the woman is standing. Okay. So during this time that you are processing the sentence, our technology, we have a camera like underneath the screen, and we capture your eye and your pupil diameter, and we track where you fixate on the screen as well. So this is one presentation mode in my study. We call it multiple image presentation. And then, so in this presentation mode, we have one image that matched with the sentence and two images that did not match. And this is an example of a second presentation mode, this single image presentation mode. So we have only one image in the center of the screen. And we just wanted to see what happened, when you see an image that matches with what you hear. And this is the third presentation mode, so no image, just an asterisk at the center of the screen the whole time. So about the result, the big picture, the main theme is the mode of presentation. In a way, it can affect the manifestation of cognitive effort. So we see that in the presentations where we have images, then the fixation duration or the eye tracking measure can capture the changes, the difficulty effect in the stimuli. But when there's no image at all, then the pupillometry measure could do that. And so that we have the no image condition, right? So there's no image. And that result support the earlier evidence showing that pupillometry can index effort related to difficulty effect. And future direction, we are developing more fine-tuned analysis to look at our data more, because with the current analysis that we have, we look at the whole sentence. The girl that the boy is driving is talking, we look at that. But right now we want to be able to look at the point of the relative verb, you know, when the difference actually happened, that distinguish these two types of sentences, and we want to see exactly what happened during that time. So that's my freshie project, and now Mohammed will continue.
Hello, my name is Mohammed. I'm in the Ohio University Neurolinguistics Lab, and I work with Dr. Hallowell. So, so far you have been exposed to the qualitative type of research and quantitative type, and you have seen examples of each. And within the quantitative type, you have just seen examples of the offline measures and online measures. So for my study, I use both the offline measures and the online measures. Just my background is in linguistic and cognitive sciences, but I just do my best to explain this as simple as I can. Okay, so why this is important? Because when we say that this is the offline measure, so this is the accuracy, how accurate a person responded to a question, and this is the speed. So how long it took for a person to respond to that question. So these two are the offline measures, and these two show, they inform us about the endpoint result of language performance. But as unexplained, we can use different type of measures. So we are interested in looking at the moment-by-moment changes, cognitive changes, while a person is engaged in a cognitive linguistic task. And specifically, I look at the structure of information, so and changing that structure and how that influences the processing and comprehension of sentences. And so we use pupillometry to measure cognitive efforts. So on use both eye tracking and pupillometry, but I just use pupillometry because it has been shown to be a valid index of effort. So now, information structure. So I'm going just to give a simple example of what I mean by information structure. It is the notion from linguistics and cognitive science, information science, and you may not be familiar with this. So I'm going just to give you a simple example, and then I'll talk about it more. So you are going just to see some pictures, and I want you just to name them just silently in your mind, okay? So are you ready? Next. No, that's fine, that's fine. Next. You ready? Next. Are you ready? Now, how many of you first named the apple and then the orange? Okay. Now, how many of you first named the apple, then the orange, and the last tip? Okay, good. did you notice anything, any pattern here? Anything? Anyone? Jump in.
Yeah, we know the answer.
All right, so you know the answer. So anyone in the crowd?
Since the apple was the first image you saw, it's more natural to go to that person than to yours.
Yeah, exactly. So the studies, previous studies, have shown that people have a tendency to put the old or given information first, and then the new information. And it is both true for the speakers and the hearers, because the old information is already activated in your memory, and the focus of your attention is on the old information. So it is easier to process and comprehend. And why I think that this is important? Well, because some studies with people with Broca's aphasia, they have shown that people with aphasia have difficulty comprehending complex syntactic structures, such as object-relative clauses that on and yes, as explained. And these studies, the main claim is that so the underlying deficit is because of the lost representations of that grammatical knowledge. But on the other camp is the studies that have shown that so it is not the linguistic representations per se, but the underlying processing that lead to that problems in comprehension. So, for example, some of them use grammatical judgment tests, and they found that people with aphasia, especially Broca's aphasia, even though they may not be able to comprehend the complex sentences, but they can still process this same type of sentences. So I think the information structure and the order of information is important, because maybe people can use these structural clues to help them process and comprehend syntactically complex structures. So I had two research questions. One, basically, I was interested in looking at if the information structure by itself influences the processing and comprehension, and the other one was if it can do the same, but with its interaction with syntax. So here is just an example of one of the trials that we used. So let me see if this works. It goes down this way, or
That one is
this way?
that's down.
Oh, yeah. So this is the context. So just think of it as the apple, the first apple that you saw. Oh gosh.
At the press conference, a reporter got into an argument.
Good. Now listen to another one. So think of, for example, this one, which is an object relative clause, and the order of information is given first and new next, as the apple and the orange.
As it turned out, the reporter that a senator attacked admitted to making an error.
And then the participants were asked questions.
Did the senator admit to making an error?
Anyone who wants to answer? I don't know the answer. So basically, this was just an example of one of the trials that we used. Just to reiterate, I look at both the comprehension and processing, and we use both the offline measures and online measures. So here is the experimental conditions, my hypothesis, and the results that we found. So basically, just in line with the previous studies, we found that object relative clauses, they are more difficult to both process and comprehend comparing to object relative clauses. But then what we found pretty interesting was that if just we look at the most difficult type of the sentence, which is object relative clause, if we just basically by tweaking the order of information, by restructuring the information from given new to new given, that facilitates the processing and as a result comprehension. So the participants, they had less error responses and their reaction time was faster, and they put less effort to process the sentences. So now that we know that information structure interacts with syntactic structure, now why I think that it is important. So let's see. So we talk about, so Travis very nicely talk about and demonstrate how our cognitive resources are limited. So just think of it as the box. And then within this box, we have to do so many things. And we have to process so many types of information. And one of them is syntactic structure. And when this syntactic structure gets really complicated, such as the one that we just saw in object relative clauses, and because this working memory capacity or cognitive resources is limited, it makes a challenge for the cognitive system. Then it is when the attention comes into play. So then we need to decide how we have to focus our attention to the most important information. And then through that, it comes the information structure, because the attention tries to look for the structural clues just to be able to ease out of that complexity. And then there are going to be so much going on with the linguistic operations and cognitive operations, and these are going to be interacting with one another. And then it is through this interaction that it comes cognitive effort. So the effort is the result of all these linguistic and cognitive operations that we can capture that effort through pupillometry and by manipulating the syntactic and information structures. So that was my part.
So we hope that you have enjoyed all of our presentations. We wanted to give you a taste, of different lab. So we thought of this visual representation. It's like sampler platter. That's what you had today. So you can think of it this in a fancy way, or you can think of like today, like this. So we have some time left for questions. So if you have any question, please feel free.
Great idea. I love this whole idea. Bringing this together. Yeah, I really appreciate it. So in everyone's talk about attention, are you conceptualizing attention as the bottleneck and as a single resource, cognitive resource, or are you thinking about attention having its resource where the memory has its resource? So in other words,
memory and attention are from the same pool of resources. So they are both within that cognitive resources, but each has different mechanisms, and based on different components of each, they interact with one another in different ways. But I think that there are two separate things, but within the same pool of resources.
So you're assuming a single resource capacity as opposed to multi-construct capacities.
It is. There are two different things within one major cognitive resource.
I'm saying this correctly, but you can correct me afterwards. Like, I know when you talk about attention and look at storage, you kind of see that there are multiple resources available, and there are some working memory models that look at working memory and attention as a single resource, where you kind of just allocate, and it's a trade-off between storage and processing. But there are others who say that there are, storage systems that give additional resource for maintenance of information, as well as a domain general kind of attention resource that fuels into it. So that there are two. There are two ways of looking at it. Depends on which model you opt for.
Yep, that's essentially.
But are they dissociable? I mean, are they? If attention goes down, does working memory also go down? If attention is good, is working memory good, or are they what I call dissociable? One could be poor and the other terrific. If it's one resource, you'd expect them both to be good or bad.
I think of attention sort of like a bottleneck or like a gatekeeper, in that it kind of dictates what you allow into your working memory that you want to further process. So, like in mine, I was saying, you know, like the air conditioner noise, it's there, but your attention's saying, that's not important.
So it's the doorway, intimate working memory, but it's also, I heard someone say, attention has to do with, well, that's the executive control is somewhere, right? How much attention do you give, or where do you direct it? So is that part of this same resource pool?
I think the resource is the same, but the attention is activated, and the attention has different mechanisms, and each get activated based on the task and the situation, but then it gets activated because of the limitations of working memory, because it is the capacity is limited, and the overall limitation of the cognitive resources. So that's the best answer I can give.
I have a question, a completely different topic, but just forcing you to think in one particular way. So now that you've had a chance to all get together on something like this, I'm curious, do you feel like what you do is more alike from each other or more different from each other now that you've had a chance to do this?
I kind of had to think about that when we were sitting down planning this colloquium. We're like, how are we going to do 6 different presentations, 6 different things, and keep everyone interested in, you know, like, how is this even going to work? Because we knew we couldn't go through everyone's whole project, and that would be hard to stick with. But once we got talking and developed these ideas, we're like, wow, we all kind of have this central theme that we're looking at, and we're all, you know, like approaching it from one way, or you're coming from that side, and you know, these guys are looking at it from this direction. So we said, wow, there is a common theme that we can really highlight that. And so once we found that out, we're like, oh yeah, we can structure it around this one central idea here.
So there's more shrimp on your platter than you okay.
Maybe what's interesting is that we come into different parts of it. So like, you know, Travis in the listening, where he comes in the beginning, and us at the end side of processing. And I'm sure when Jamie and David's project, you can actually see some cognitive involvement in it as well. So it's a theme, I think, in our department, maybe.
Any other questions? I have a question for Mohammed. Forgive me, but what are your subjects actually looking at? What are they?
Just the asterisk, just the one
the
that's
asterisk.
on yeah. I was just interested in pupil dilation.
Yes,
So
right.
just the asterisk.
This is a little off in left field, but do you think that if you had, so they're listening and they're looking at the asterisk, I think it might be very interesting to look at what their response, their pupil dilation, if the sentence were printed.
But then that is possible, but then
To compare it to the auditory, I mean. Right.
yeah, actually there are some studies that use just reading. There are some studies.
reading?
Yeah, but then it introduced another confound into
Yes, it would.
design. So
Definitely. I actually found, I say it because my reaction was, I found it much easier to listen because the prosody was carrying the meaning. Whereas when I was just reading it, my eyes were jumping back and forth. Right, so it was almost like a different task altogether. And I'm a pretty fast reader, but those were difficult sentences, right? But much easier to hear.
Actually, it could be looked at two different angles, because in auditory comprehension, you listen to the information as it goes. So, and you cannot go back. But in reading, you can just go back and double check. So it could be both actually.
Right, thank you. And the follow-up question is, I actually have done a little reading on the subject, but I don't fully understand why pupil dilation. Why is it that cognitive effort is reflected in pupil dilation? Particularly with a neutral field out there with just an asterisk. What is it? Is it because we're visualizing? Are we visualizing the stimuli? I'm not asking really more of a physiological question.
Neurometry is a psychophysiological measure, and so it is in line with ERPs and EEGs and all those brainwave techniques. So in this case, so it shows your physiological reactions. In this case, your pupil dilation to a psychological event, which is sentence comprehension. So.
But behind that, you've got neural firing. I mean, this is cognitive effort we're talking about. So you must be activating something. We're measuring it with pupil dilation, but it's implying something more.
Right, because when you have a complex sentence, so in this case, then because there is a model, is a dual path model of language processing that just says that the ventral stream is for more perception and recognition, but the dorsal stream is more for the processing of higher cognitive operations, and it involves the anterior portions of the cortex, and especially the insula and the areas around the Broca's area. So, yeah, sure.
And memory regions associated with those. So there's neural activation across the attention and memory systems, as well as the linguistic systems. And I think that's what you're indexing as.
Yeah, and the anterior portion of the superior temporal lobe, which it has been shown to be involved in the memory task.
There are multiple influences on the pupils, right? So there are so many things that change our pupils. Exposure to light is a big one. Sexual arousal, degree of interest, curiosity, change or excitement, or some kind of surprise. All these things change our pupils. In fact, much more so than cognitive load does. So when we run these experiments, we have to be very careful to control all these different factors. And there are different neural systems that relate to the cognitive linguistic load than there are that relate to things like light and sexual arousal. So it's a different neural system. The locus ceruleus is the key structure involved in the cognitive load indices, which is not involved in changing pupil dilation with a lot of other kind of sensory experiences.
Fabulous. Cool.